What really happens behind the scenes of elections? Let's break down the truths and myths of electoral fraud. Oftentimes, the very mention of electoral fraud conjures images of sinister backroom dealings, mysterious figures tampering with ballots, and the integrity of our democratic process hanging in the balance. But how much of this is fact, and how much is fiction? Today, we delve deep into the world of elections, voter integrity, and the reality of politics in the USA. When discussing electoral fraud, it's essential to first understand what it truly entails. Electoral fraud refers to illegal interference with the election process, whether to influence the outcome of an election or to suppress votes. This interference can take many forms, from voter impersonation and manipulation of electronic voting systems to the more subtle tactics like disinformation campaigns. But how common is electoral fraud in reality? In the vast landscape of politics, especially in the USA, the perception of electoral fraud is often inflated by sensationalist media reports and political rhetoric. Statistically, proven cases of electoral fraud are rare, especially when considering the millions of votes cast in national elections. It's crucial to distinguish between isolated incidents and systemic issues. While electoral fraud is a serious allegation, the mechanisms in place to prevent and detect it are robust. These include voter ID laws, audits, and electronic voting security measures. One of the most discussed topics in recent years has been voter integrity. Maintaining voter integrity means ensuring that every vote is counted accurately and fairly. In the USA, this is of paramount importance, given the country's emphasis on democratic principles. But why then does the specter of electoral fraud loom so large in public discourse? Often, it's a matter of perception over reality. The fear of fraud can sometimes undermine trust more than the fraud itself. Understanding the reality of electoral fraud requires looking beyond conspiracy theories to the actual data and established safeguards. As we dive deeper into electoral fraud, it's important to address some of the most persistent myths that circulate around elections. One of the most common beliefs is that voter impersonation is rampant. However, studies and investigations have repeatedly shown that this form of fraud is exceedingly rare. For instance, a comprehensive study by the Brennan Center for Justice found that the incidence of voter impersonation is between 0.0003% and 0.0025%. Such low numbers suggest that while the fear of impersonation exists, the reality is negligible. Another myth is the widespread use of fake ballots. The idea of truckloads of counterfeit ballots being smuggled into polling stations is more a plot from a Hollywood thriller than reality. In truth, the logistics of printing, distributing, and counting millions of fake ballots without detection is virtually impossible. Election officials take extensive measures to ensure ballot security, including watermarks and secure transportation. There's also the notion that mail-in voting is particularly susceptible to fraud. While mail-in voting does carry unique challenges, such as ensuring ballots are sent and returned in a secure manner, evidence of widespread fraud through this method is minimal. The USA has successfully employed absentee voting for decades, with rigorous checks in place to validate these ballots. Furthermore, there's a belief that deceased individuals frequently cast votes. However, such claims often stem from clerical errors or delayed updates to voter rolls rather than actual fraud. When examining these myths, it becomes clear that they often gain traction due to misinformation and political agendas rather than factual evidence. Dispelling these myths is critical to maintaining the integrity of elections and ensuring that the public trusts the democratic process. While myths often overshadow reality, it's important to acknowledge that electoral fraud does occur, albeit infrequently. Real cases, when they happen, are usually isolated incidents rather than indicative of a widespread systemic issue. For instance, in the 2018 North Carolina congressional race, a significant case of electoral fraud emerged involving absentee ballot tampering. A political operative was accused of collecting incomplete absentee ballots and filling them out in favor of a particular candidate. This case was a stark reminder of the vulnerabilities within the system and led to a new election being called. Across the USA, other cases have involved individuals attempting to vote more than once or non-citizens being registered due to administrative errors. However, these instances are typically caught and prosecuted, reinforcing the effectiveness of existing checks and balances designed to protect voter integrity. The consequences for those caught committing electoral fraud can be severe, including fines and imprisonment. These penalties underscore the seriousness with which electoral fraud is treated by the justice system. While the media and political figures may amplify isolated incidents to suggest a more pervasive problem, actual data shows that such cases are exceptions rather than the rule. The rarity of these cases should reassure voters that while electoral fraud is a legitimate concern, it is not a widespread crisis threatening the integrity of elections. By focusing on these real cases, we can better understand the specific vulnerabilities within the system and work to address them without falling prey to exaggerated claims. With the integrity of elections being paramount, numerous safeguards are in place to combat electoral fraud and ensure fair outcomes. In the USA, these measures are multi-layered, involving federal, state, and local efforts to secure the voting process. Voter ID laws remain one of the most debated safeguards. Proponents argue that requiring identification at the polls helps prevent impersonation and ensures that only eligible voters cast ballots. Critics, however, caution that these laws may disproportionately affect marginalized communities, potentially suppressing legitimate votes. Despite these debates, many states have implemented ID requirements with exceptions and alternatives to accommodate all eligible voters. Another critical safeguard is the post-election audit. These audits verify the accuracy of election results, providing a check against both machine errors and fraudulent activity. By manually reviewing a sample of paper ballots, officials can confirm that electronic voting machines have accurately recorded votes. In addition, advancements in technology have introduced new ways to secure elections. Enhanced encryption and secure software systems help protect electronic voting machines from tampering and cyber attacks. Furthermore, bipartisan election oversight ensures that representatives from different political parties oversee the process, reducing the risk of bias or manipulation. Education also plays a vital role in preventing electoral fraud. By informing voters about the voting process and their rights, election officials can help ensure that voters are not easily misled by false claims or misinformation. These safeguards, while not infallible, work collectively to uphold the integrity of elections and maintain public confidence in the democratic process. Public perception plays a crucial role in how electoral fraud is viewed and addressed. Often, the narrative surrounding elections can be shaped more by perceptions than by facts, leading to widespread misunderstandings about the prevalence and impact of fraud. In recent years, political rhetoric has heightened the public's anxiety about voter integrity. Claims of rigged elections or compromised voting processes can erode trust even when evidence doesn't support these allegations. This distrust can have tangible effects, leading to decreased voter turnout and skepticism towards elected officials. The media also significantly influences public perception, with sensationalist headlines sometimes giving more weight to allegations of fraud than the subsequent investigations and clarifications. This can create a skewed perception that fraud is more widespread than it truly is. Social media platforms amplify these narratives, with misinformation spreading rapidly and often unchecked. Addressing these perception issues requires transparency from election officials and clear communication about the processes and safeguards in place. By demystifying the voting process and providing evidence-based reassurances, public officials can help rebuild trust in the electoral system. Furthermore, education campaigns that focus on media literacy and critical thinking can empower voters to discern credible information from hyperbole. In a digital age where information spreads rapidly, fostering a well-informed electorate is vital. Ultimately, while electoral fraud is a serious concern, an informed public that understands the realities and limitations of fraud can make more confident decisions and engage more fully in the democratic process. We've explored the complex world of electoral fraud, separating myths from facts and examining the safeguards in place. Remember, while electoral fraud is rare, it's vital to stay informed and engaged. If you found this breakdown helpful, be sure to subscribe for more insights into politics and education. Leave a comment with your thoughts or questions, and let's continue the conversation about voter integrity and democracy.